Okay, so I just want to make a quick point about the shape of the marginal cost and the average total cost curves. Okay, so like I said in the prior slide or two, because of the diminishing marginal product, the return for your variable cost is going to go down, right? So for every $100 that you spend on CGI in this graph, the first one's going to get you 10, then 8, and then 6, and then 4 minutes. So your marginal product will go down per your input, right? So that actually increases your marginal cost, and we saw that here. So the marginal cost generally increases as the inputs increase. Okay. So likewise, the marginal cost is going to increase per your quantity as well. To be more specific, uh, I actually want to correct my statement. Marginal cost is not going to increase per um, per your inputs. Marginal cost in this case is stagnant per input, right? Going from 0 to 100, your marginal cost is 100. From 100 to 200, your marginal cost is 100, right? But per quantity, your marginal cost is actually increasing. So 0 to 10, it's 10. 10 to 18, it's 12.5. 18 to 24, your marginal cost is 16.67, etc. So your marginal cost per quantity is going to be increasing. Okay. Your average total cost, it starts actually pretty high. Why does it start pretty high? Well, at first you have this fixed cost, right? And then your variable cost, but your fixed cost is going to be scaled down. So the average fixed cost is going to be divided by your quantity. So the higher the quantity, fixed cost is not changing. So the higher the quantity, the lower the average fixed cost, right? So you make your first 10, it's going to be 50. Your second, your first 18, the average fixed cost is going to be 27.78 because the numerator stays the same, but the denominator is increasing. So your average fixed cost will drop, but your average variable cost will increase, but probably by a lower rate by which the average fixed cost is decreasing, right? Because fixed cost is usually it starts pretty high. Average variable cost will decrease at the same rate as the marginal product diminishes. So that's why your average total cost generally starts pretty high, and like it'll pretty much cap out when this is 0. It should be should we go to infinity, and then like your first good, it'll just be your fixed cost plus the variable cost for one good, and then it'll gradually decrease until it reaches a minimum, and then it starts increasing again. Okay, so what's that minimum? Well, think about this. If you have a test, and if you take a test and you score higher than your previous average, what happens? So if your average is 80 and you get an 85, what happens to your average? Okay, well, your average is going to go up, right? An 85 will bring your average up. Okay. Well, the next test, right? Every test that you take will be the marginal grade that you get, right? And your previous average, well, that's going to be your average grade, right? So if your marginal grade is increasing, well, that's going to bring up your average grade. So at the point where your marginal cost is equal to your average total cost, well, guess what? Every point thereafter, every point that your marginal cost is bigger than your average total cost will increase your average total cost. And every point that it's below it will decrease your average total cost. Okay. So basically what this means is that I want to correct that last statement too. Not every point below your average total cost is going to bring down your average because you start with the fixed cost. Okay, so that's why average total cost drops. It's like this, but then every point after the marginal cost crosses will be higher than your average total cost. So this minimum, or I gave it away. This point here is the minimum average total cost because it's the point at which your marginal cost starts to bring your average total cost back up. So marginal cost is going to start below your average total cost, and eventually it's going to cross with it at the minimum point, and thereafter it goes higher and higher. Okay, so your average goes up. So likewise, if your marginal cost is lower than your average total cost, it's pulling down your average total cost. So at the point where average total cost is equal to marginal cost, your average total cost is minimized. Okay. I'm just going to continue rolling with it. So the next slide has nothing to do with this point, but I want to keep with this pace. Okay. All right, so think about your short run and long run costs. Okay. So if I told you that we have to make a movie today, and the only actor we have is Kurt Russell, so we know Kurt Russell's fixed cost. Okay. You're pretty much locked into that fixed cost. But what happens if I say, all right, well, we'll make the movie in a year or two or maybe 3, and we have Kurt Russell and we know what his fixed cost is, but we can also sign Sylvester Stallone, or we can sign Arnold Schwarzenegger or Dolph Lundgren for that same role. And their fixed costs are going to be different than Kurt Russell's. The salary you pay Kurt Russell for the movies are going to be different than the salary you pay Arnold, and that's going to be different than the salary you pay for Sylvester Stallone, and different for Dolph Lundgren. So in the short run, your fixed cost is pretty much locked up. In the long run, you have control over your fixed cost. And then also keep in mind, in the short run, your variable costs, just like in the long run, are not locked up, because that depends on the quantity that you produce. Okay. So in the longer term time horizon, we expect fixed costs to be more malleable, something that we can change, because we can choose what fixed costs are cheapest for any level of output. So you can choose which actor you want to sign for a particular salary, depending on that salary, in the long run. In the short run, you don't really have that option. Okay, so we distinguish in economics between the short run average total cost and the long run average total cost. Okay, so the short run average total cost essentially takes the fixed cost as fixed. It's something that you can't change. Okay, so you can more or less determine where the average total cost is, and produce based on that. But in the long run, you can take the minimum of the fixed cost here into consideration. So each one of these, like the green ones here and this black one for short run average total cost, is the average total cost curve in the short run for a particular fixed cost. So this could be the short run average total cost for Kurt Russell, and this could be the short run average total cost for Sylvester Stallone, and this could be the short run average total cost given that the fixed cost is for Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, so each one has a different average total cost depending on what the fixed cost is, and these green ones are basically what you're locked up to if that's your fixed cost. But in the long run, you can decide what your fixed cost is, and basically you could pick the minimum fixed cost for every short run average total cost that exists for all of the market. So your long run average total cost curve is basically going to be the minimum of every point on the short run average total cost. So it's going to be the minimum cost for any level of output for any fixed cost that you assume. Okay, so for the range of all possible fixed costs, what is the minimum total cost, average total cost that I can get for that particular output? That will determine your long run average total cost. Okay. All right, and then I'm just going to keep rolling because this is the second to last slide, and I just want to knock them out because we're running short on time. Okay, so suppose that we consider the original character development a fixed cost. So we have to come up with, you're writing a movie and you have to write all the characters in there. So you have to cast the character, you have to draw them, come up with the story design and all that. Okay, so that's your fixed cost. Okay, after that, so once you've drawn the characters and you've got their graphics ready to go, all you have to do is animate them. And for you guys who are probably interested in CGI, I understand that's not easy, but this is just an assumption we're making, right? So coming up with the characters is hard. Getting them to move in the frame is not very hard. Okay, So once we have the characters developed, it's very easy to create additional minutes with the character. Okay. So in this case, the long run average total cost will decrease in quantity. Okay. So basically, as you take your average total cost, right? You pay a high fixed cost in the beginning to develop the characters, to draw them out, to come up with a character background. And then every minute of output that you produce with the character thereafter is decreasing your your average total cost. Okay. So when the average total cost is decreasing in quantity, we call that increasing returns to scale. So basically, you could write 1,000 sequels with this movie at a lower average total cost than just coming up with the original character development. Okay, so a lot of projects will tend to follow this. This is like, let's say you're developing like a program or something, and like a computer program, right? So you're probably gonna have some maintenance costs that'll increase your average total cost over time. But by and large, writing the program is probably the most difficult part, like getting the groundwork in there. And then after that, it's a little bit of maintenance, but a lot of just running what you have to do. So things like that will have increasing returns to the scale. These are like projects that you can kind of automate, or maybe you're developing a skill. So let's say you're LeBron James, right? It probably took LeBron James a lot to get really good at basketball. So he had to develop a skill set, right? But now, if LeBron James is playing a game, it's probably pretty natural to him. And I understand that, he's getting a little older, so maybe it's a little harder than it was 5 years ago. But per minute of game time, the amount that he has to practice is probably a lot less than when he was in grade school and high school, right? So things that have like a high skill barrier will have increasing returns to scale. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Okay, the lower your average total cost, the cost of your time, or the cost of it could be an explicit cost or whatever. Okay, so increasing returns to scale decreases when it has a decreasing long run average total cost curve. Okay. On the other hand, let's say that you've written your characters' backstories and whatever, but every time you come up with a new character, you kind of run out of ideas. Like the first character, you're going to make them stand in for the author, and the second character, you're going to make a vague ripoff of like Luke Skywalker, and the third character, you're going to make a vague ripoff of whatever, Superman. The fourth character, like, well, how do I make the fourth character work with these three original characters? And how do I make the story interesting? And am I just ripping off a bunch of people? And you start running out of ideas. So it takes you longer to develop the additional characters. So your average total cost for, movie time is going to increase because you're running out of ideas as you write your script or whatever. So that's your decreasing returns to scale. An average total cost curve that is increasing as your quantity increases. This might happen for industries that are like really efficient for like a small like set of employees, but as the number of employees increases and increases, and the amount of stuff that they have to do increases and increases, well, you kind of like every employee becomes like so ingrained in their own skill that they don't know what's happening everywhere else, and it becomes like a bureaucracy. So that might be a case where you have decreasing returns to scale. So some offices might limit the amount of people that are in the office, just so that you don't have this like human resource nightmare of nobody knows anybody, nobody knows who to ask questions to, and whatever. So that's a way of avoiding decreasing returns to scale. But essentially, all decreasing returns to scale is an industry in which your long run average total cost will increase as your output increases. Okay. And then the other one is just the constant returns to the scale, and that's just your long run average total cost is more or less fixed regardless of quantity. Okay. All right, so just to wrap everything up, this last slide is looking forward at the different market types, and I know I only have one lecture left, so we're not going to be able to cover all four. We're really just going to cover 1 and 2 and 3. And oligopoly we kind of covered already in good depth. So we're not going to cover additional oligopoly models unless you do the journal 5 is all oligopoly, even though it's elections. There's 2 or 3 parties who are strategically interacting. So it's not like technically an industry, but it is, regardless of whether you think it's not, whether you think it is or not. And then the first question is like explicitly oligopoly because it's looking at 3 firms competing. And then the journal 6 about research and development is also an oligopoly question, particularly the vaccine development questions, which are like the first 4 or so questions. They're all oligopoly. And then we can look back at the lectural models where we talked about the USFL and the NFL, or there was one other one that was oligopoly. So there's the job signal, but that's not really industry. That's just game theory. Or maybe the third one was Hawk and Dove. I thought there was another, but the USFL NFL one was oligopoly. So I just talked a lot about what oligopoly we did without actually defining it. So let's go from left to right. So pure competition is what your book calls it. I call it perfect competition. That's just a hang up I have. I've always called it perfect competition. That's what I know it as. But they're the same thing. So pure or perfect competition is when you have a very large number of firms. The product is mostly standardized. No firm has control over the product. It's very easy to enter. There's no non-price competition like quantity competition or advertisements or something like that. So an example could be agriculture. So imagine, or here's one I like better, a food truck, right? So the barriers to entry for a food truck is literally you just need a truck, right? Like one of those trucks with like the little steel sides and like a window. Probably not that expensive relative to most business startup costs. So a small fixed cost. The product is pretty much standard. So, if you get the halal food truck, you can get that over here. You can get that 3 blocks away. You can get that 10 blocks from there. And it's all going to be, chicken over rice or whatever, shawarma. It's all going to be kind of the same thing regardless of who's giving it to you. It's more or less a franchise. None of them have control over price. If you go to any food truck, it's pretty much going to be a $5 $5 charge for that chicken over rice with the soda. Maybe it's $6 since I've left grad school, but they're really not they're price takers. They're really not going to. You're not going to see one food truck raise their price to $7 because then you'll go 2 blocks away to that same food truck that's selling the same exact food. Okay. Conditions of entry are pretty easy. Like I said, all you really need is a food truck and a spot. Non-price competition is essentially none for the halal truck. Location might matter, so there'll be some location competition. But, all right, in the real world, that perfect competition might not totally exist. But by and large, the food truck is more or less going to compete in price, and they're going to be price takers. Okay. Monopolistic competition is similar to perfect competition in that there's many firms, but different in that each firm sells a little bit different of a good. Okay, so I like jeans as like a monopolistic competition. So the brand of jeans matters for some reason. So there you can have Levi's, you can have Lucky brand jeans, you could have I don't know. I think Aeropostale probably has some. I don't even know if Aeropostale's still around. I don't know. It's been a while since I bought jeans, but there's probably hundreds of places you can go to get jeans, and the brand name is going to matter to some people, and they might look a little bit different. Um, some might have tatters, some might not. Some might be a little bit darker, some might not. Um, so the products are a little bit different from each other. It's not like halal where you're getting the same food. Um, regardless of what food truck you're going to. Lucky Brand jeans are maybe a little bit higher end than Levi's, which might be a little higher end than, the Foreman Mills brand jeans, right? So a little bit differentiated. And because they're differentiated, maybe Lucky Brand's able to charge a little bit higher price than Levi's, and maybe Levi's is able to charge a little bit of higher price than Foreman Mills. So the differentiation allows for some control over price, but it's not going to be the same control over price that a monopoly would or that an oligopoly would have, um, depending on the oligopoly model. The oligopoly is a little more nuanced. Uh, Conditions of entry for monopolistic competition are pretty easy. In order to make a pair of jeans, really just need to have like a sewing machine. So like any schmo on the street can create a set of jeans, but maybe the branding matters a little bit. So they're not probably not going to see the same level of prestige as Lucky Brand jeans or Levi's or whatever. Calvin Klein, I guess, is jeans. I don't know. I chose jeans because they made sense at the time. It's something that I go to, but I don't know why I'm blanking on all on jean brands. Okay, so like I said, brands matter, non-price competition matters. So monopolistic competition will advertise. They might worry about location. Um, they might have price competition, but they might also have differentiation competition. So if everybody's selling blue jeans, it's in your favor to sell like dark blue jeans or navy blue jeans or black jeans, okay? Because then you're kind of getting a higher market share from that. Oligopoly would be next. So oligopoly is when there's only like 2 to 4 firms, typically, maybe a little more, but a few firms, not as many as perfect or monopolistic competition, which there could be 50 to infinite number of firms. Like monopolistic competition is usually going to have like a lot of firms. Maybe not 50, that's high, but it could be 50. It doesn't matter. Oligopoly is probably going to be less than 10, essentially. Somewhere usually around like 4 is kind of like a number that we deal with a lot for some reason. Like a big 4 record companies. It's usually like between 2 and 5, I would say, is pretty standard for oligopoly. Above 5, you're kind of moving into different territory there, but it depends on market share too. So it might be the case that it's like 2 big beer firms and then 50 really small beer firms who have some market share, but maybe of those 50 firms, their market share adds up to like 10% of the market. So it doesn't really, even though there's a lot of firms, they're not really doing a whole lot relative to like the 2 big firms, Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and Miller Coors. And Modelo would be a third firm, actually. I said 2 firms, it's really 3. Modelo makes Corona beers. So the type of product could be standardized, it could be differentiated. Oligopoly is, in my opinion, kind of like the murkiest, because there's like so few firms. How they compete is very, very weird. So it could be that they're competing in price. It could be that they're competing in quantity. It could be that they're colluding and not competing at all. It could be like Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and Miller Coors sometimes call each other up and say, "Hey, what's your price? What's your price?" And this, you'll see this in the journal if you do not the journal, the discussion thread. If you do the discussion thread, I have an oligopoly in chicken that just got busted for antitrust because they were colluding with other major chicken brands. So oligopolies can compete in a lot of variables. It could also advertise with another discussion thread. They could compete in quantity, price, like the standard things. They could compete in quality. So it might be the case that Miller Coors is has a market on light beer, and Anheuser-Busch InBev has a market on craft beer. That's not actually the case, but could be. What else? So there's a lot of ways that they can compete. They can compete on timing. So sometimes if it's like a movie company, like a Universal Studios or Disney, they'll compete on who can set the opening day earliest, so that they kind of reserve that day for their thing, and then sometimes it makes it hard for other movies that wanted to open on that same day to compete. So that's a way of competing. The oligopoly is pretty limitless in how they compete, because there's like so few firms. What one firm does matters a lot. Whereas with like monopolistic competition and pure competition, what one firm does doesn't really matter. Okay. Um, so they have some control over price depending on the model. So, if they're competing only in price, well, guess what? In equilibrium, they're going to be pricing it at a competitive rate. But if they're competing in other factors, well, that determines that allows them to have a little bit more control. Conditions of entry are pretty hard for oligopoly. It could be that there's only so much demand. It could be that there's natural barriers to entry. It could be regulation. It could be location. So, if there's a city center and there's only so many people in that city, well, guess what? If there's a McDonald's and a Wendy's there, well, Burger King's probably gonna have to move to the next city to get any real reasonable demand. So the barriers to entry is essentially what limits firms from entering, right? From there being additional firms that drive it out of the oligopoly, right? If there were very few barriers to entry, well, then you're probably not going to be an oligopoly in the long run, because other firms would enter and drive price down. Some firms are natural, or some industries are naturally oligopolistic. So if you look at the textbook, there's stuff about the first mover and the limit price, where a firm might not set their price to the their revenue maximizing price, because that will allow another entrant to come in, and therefore actually decrease their revenue. So even though it's not like technically it is technically the revenue maximizing price, but it's not technically the revenue maximizing price, assuming that there's only one firm in the market. Just read the limit price section. I'm not going to cover it in depth here. This is not the time or the place. So non-price competition we just talked about. There's a ton of oligopolistic markets. I'd like media for oligopoly, really. The recording industry, the movie industry, beer's a good oligopoly industry. Household appliances, I guess. Who knows? Like, who cares about that? Automobiles is a good one. So, there's like Toyota and Ford and I'm blanking on the GM. So there's like a few automobile companies, but there's not like a ton. Volkswagen, but there's probably like less than like 20 that most people can name. And of those 20, probably like 6 have really good market share, and the others don't. And then finally, pure monopoly, which I just call monopoly because monopoly already means one. So pure monopoly just means it's perfectly one. I don't know why your book uses pure monopoly. It's the only time I've ever seen this. But the number of firms is one. The type of product is unique. You can't have other products in monopoly. And there's different barriers to entry for monopoly. It could be natural. There's only so much demand. It could be a high fixed cost. So the revenue that you make might not be justified by the fixed cost of having the second entrant. So if like two companies have to split their costs, or split the profits overall, well the cost might block that second entrant from coming in and splitting the profits. Of like whoever comes in first is the only one that's like sustainable in the market. It might be government created. Patents and copyright are examples of monopoly, and this is another thing that I have in the research and development journal. So I differentiate oligopoly competition for a vaccine versus monopoly competition for a vaccine, or lack of competition, and why it makes sense to have a copyright or a patent on, or I shouldn't say copyright, why it makes sense to have a patent on that vaccine development, or for a particular vaccine. Conditions of entry are blocked. So if other firms could enter, then it would not be a monopoly anymore. You'd move into oligopoly. Non-price competition. So you can increase your demand using advertising, but you're not really competing with anybody. All you're really doing is increasing your demand. So I wouldn't even consider that non-price competition. But because advertising for other firms is because advertising in other firms is considered competition, I think that's why the book wrote it, even though they're not competing with anybody, so it shouldn't really be competition. So utilities are pretty good examples of monopoly. So cable in Philadelphia is you're pretty much playing with Comcast here. You might have the opportunity for FiOS, but not really. It's kind of hard to come by. So like if we're taking the example of Comcast, doesn't really have competitors in Philadelphia, or depending on where you're at, typically the cable companies more or less slice up the map. So it's usually monopolies in particular regions, and sometimes there'll be like one or two competitors in smaller locations within the bigger region. There's really no option for me to get FiOS here in my area of Philadelphia. They don't do FiOS in my neighborhood, so I'm stuck with Comcast. Whatever, that's fine. If Comcast set their price to $1,000, well, guess what? I have to pay it because I need internet, because otherwise I won't be able to have a job. I am price inelastic, or my price elasticity of demand for cable or internet is inelastic. It's basically perfectly inelastic up until the point at which up until my salary, basically. Maybe even a little higher, because in addition to my salary, I also enjoy the internet. So if they want to raise their price, I'm kind of a captive market. I can't really do a whole lot about it. Conditions of entry are hard. For FiOS to enter, they'd have to lay wire fiber optic cables across my area of Philadelphia. That's really expensive, so they need to be able to justify their cost with profit. And if they're splitting half their cost with Comcast, well, maybe they can't justify their cost. Also, because Comcast is such an ingrained part of my city, it's located here, and it's like Comcast is a huge firm. They probably have some pull in the local politics, making it difficult for FiOS to have great market conditions. So conditions for entry for FiOS are pretty limited. Non-price competition, yeah, Comcast advertises in Philadelphia. Why do they advertise? To increase their demand? Probably they don't really need to. Maybe they're competing with FiOS advertisements even though a lot of people in Philadelphia can't buy FiOS, but they're probably just strengthening their brand. And Comcast, even though it's a cable company, does a lot of things. So Comcast like owns NBC, they own ESPN and all these things. No, Disney owns ESPN. That's wrong. But Comcast owns all these different things. So maybe that's why they're advertising as well, just increasing their brand name, which they might have to do because we're a captive market, and they can charge monopoly prices. Comcast is seen as like if you took a survey of Philadelphians, Comcast is like one of like the most hated companies in Philly. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know if that's in Philadelphia or America, but yeah, people don't tend to like Comcast, so the branding is probably necessary in that sense, to increase demand for people who are like, all right, I'm going to be a cable cutter, but then you still need the internet for that. So, all right, so that concludes producer theory. Next week we're doing pure competition. Oh, where's my mouse? Perfect competition. We're going to do Monopoly, and then we're going to touch on monopolistic competition. There's really not a whole lot there. Even your book is pretty short on monopolistic competition. I don't like it's a useful market. Actually, I'd say most markets tend to follow monopolistic competition. But it's just kind of a like a mix between the two, so it's not really like a whole unique thing in itself. Whereas Monopoly and pure competition are like the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think oligopoly is kind of my favorite because it involves game theory in a way that none of the other three tend to do. So, yeah. Anyway, we'll move on to those three, and oligopoly we've covered in depth. All right. Have a good week. If you have any questions, see me in office hours Wednesday, 8 o'clock, as always. All right. Good luck on quantitative assignment 5.